Alright, good evening, afternoon, morning, whatever. Man, I'm so fucking scatterbrained. Alright, so here I am at, Riverside Park. I like to come out here and do these sometimes because it gets me away from the computer. Just dropped off, the U-Haul trailer I used. I have an interview coming up, a phone interview. So we'll see how that goes. And I'll try to be on the lookout for a Virginia number and just answer all Virginia numbers, I guess. So that's that. So figured I'd come out here and talk to the internet. Um, yep. As I've stated before, the predicament that I'm in is, when you suffer job loss, you just got to cut back on expenses, and that's what I've been doing. I let my musical gear go, as I've stated before, and while I wish I got more for it, the music gear paid for itself over the years, so I'm not entirely upset about it. And as I've also stated before, and I must confess, became the victim of what they call lifestyle creep. Hello, I have two vehicles. My daily, which is the Hyundai Santa Cruz, and my project vehicle, which is the Geo Tracker, and that's at a shop because I was getting to the point where, one, I was working on it more than I was driving it. Two, I was getting to the obstacle where I buy some tool equipment that I use once, and that was going to be just as costly as bringing it to a shop. So it's at a garage. Hopefully they don't get too greedy with it. You know, and I called ahead of time. To say, is this something you can work on? Because it's an older vehicle, and with older vehicles, it's hard to find parts for them. You know what I'm saying? And as I mentioned before, it's been that way since the Cash for Clunkers program. Trade in your old car, get this new thing, and look where it got us. Let me flip the camera a little bit. All those vehicles, like, how long do you think everybody's going to keep those vehicles? Let me know what you think. Do you think you're going to keep them for a long time, or are they just going to flip them, or trade them in rather, and just get the next new thing? Honestly, I don't have an honest answer for that. Before I got my Santa Cruz, which you can kind of see way over there, it's the one with the CB antenna on top. You can kind of see it. It's parked right next to that white F-150. I had my old truck for 18 years, and I would have been happy to keep it, if the undercarriage wasn't so rotted out. I'm originally from Massachusetts, so we all know what salt likes to do to vehicles. So that was more of a time of need, not to try to keep up with the Joneses or anything. And that's obviously a decision that I may have to come to grips with. Obviously, it would make more feasible sense to sell the tracker and use that for car payments for the Santa Cruz. Assuming that I get a job that pays what I was making before. And let me include the hidden factor of student loans. And while I said mine are still part of that mega forbearance, surprising, but okay. I recently started plucking away at those just to try to make a dent. And then this happens, and so let's assume that they were to say we're going to take it out of that, and he's going to have to pay this amount, or suffer the consequences, then I may just have to do the opposite and just call up Hyundai and say, look, I can't afford to make the payments on this. You're just going to have to come and take it. And, that's where I'm at right now. It's definitely a crossroads. Like I said, I do have an interview. We'll see what happens. And I did apply. No, I didn't apply. I did discover a couple of other companies. Through, again, word of mouth, a human connection. So we'll see what happens with that. And again, I'm not trying to do these just to be, a big YouTuber, make money, all that stuff. That's just not what my channel's all about. Like I said, I'd rather people like and subscribe because they actually like the content. But that's just me. Could I decide never to post another video, and then next thing you know, I get 1 million subscribers the next day? That would break the internet. And I'm sure, and I think some people said their channel, blew up, from like one video, and and I'm sure that has happened. The channel's like non-existent, and then they do one video that for whatever reason, gets blasted into the algorithms as a top video to see, and then all of a sudden, 1 million people watch it and then subscribe. It could happen. I'm not betting on it, and that's why, my main focus is, getting steady employment. And, you should still be thankful. You should be thankful for whatever that you can get and just work with it and then build upon it. And sometimes you have to take a step back before you can take 2 steps forward. And that's what I'm going through right now. Like, the interview, I have is, in food service, not what I want to do for eternity, but, if it's, full time, then I'll take it. And, what I'm starting to see is, kind of like the reverse of the Great Resignation. And it's almost like it's shifting back to the companies, rather than, the applicants. But, what are they going to do with that? Are they going to try to force people into schedules that don't work with it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Are they going to have that mentality, be thankful you have a job? You know what I'm saying? And, mind you, I moved down here for, it was a better gig at the time, than what I was doing before. And I apply at those jobs too, manual labor. Maybe that's just what I'm used to, I guess, And, again, this isn't one of those, doom and gloom about, how the system is oppressing us, how we all need to flee the U.S. or stand up to ICE or any of that, because there's dozens of those videos, and, I have reservations with what some of those people are posting. If they're posting shit, like, start taking their channel could get flagged. I hope it doesn't, because, while we live in the U.S., freedom of expression, wants to express yourself, but that has a limit too. It's basically protection from a government. Now, obviously, things like, threats, they're not protected. They are not protected. You know what I mean? And direct hate speech, same, or dare I say it, convincing somebody to, self-delete, that's not protected either. Just ask Michelle Carter how that worked out. But anyhow, You know, you can look up that. You can look up stories about that. You know, there was a documentary called "I Love You Now Die." Check it out. That actually happened in my home state. But you know, anyhow, you know, enough ranting and raving. You know, this is my current situation. You know, on the job hunt. You know, possibly considering leaving the U.S. for opportunities elsewhere. You know, it's in spite of, you know, what debts I have, not because of it. You know, because I said before, if you go that route, you know, you pretty much can't go back. You know, you're all but completely forfeiting your right to live, hell, maybe even visit the U.S., especially if it's a high enough debt. Because, you know, let's say it's student loan debt. You know, especially if it's the federal government. You know, they'll find ways. You don't want to fuck with them. You know, if it's a large enough private debt, you know, and you flood the U.S., and then let's say you come back to visit family, you know, you could be accosted. Because, you know, when they issue a warrant out for your arrest because you missed a court date, then, yeah, they'll start checking places where you hang out. I mean, it'll be at their convenience, but, you know, all it takes is just, you know, one board sheriff's deputy. Just go cruise around at an address you may be at, and then boom, you're fucked. Anyhow, you know, this is just my little world away from my little world. Here's to hoping for my interview. I'll talk to you.